morning. As she said, my name is Ptomey, and I work at the Energy Balance Lab at the University of Kansas Medical Center. And so today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit more about understanding energy balance. So food currently has never been cheaper, more available, and accessible. It seems you can't even drive down the street without seeing at least one place every mile that's advertising cheap and delicious food. The problem is that food has never been higher in calories, fat, sugar, and lower in nutrient content. On top of that, physical activity has diminished almost 20% in the last 50 years. It seems that we're finding new ways to be sedentary. Actually, on my way out here yesterday, I was in the airport and there was someone on a motorized scooter that kind of looked like a skateboard just going down the hallways. Apparently, we've found ways that we don't even have to walk anymore. So it should be no surprise that across the world, the prevalence of overweight and obesity has increased. In females, in almost 25% of countries, the prevalence of overweight and obesity is 60%, and that reaches to almost 50% of the countries in males. So how does this all work together? What is happening in which our energy intake is increasing, physical activity is decreasing, and how does that impact our weight? Well, that really comes back to this concept of energy balance. So energy balance really refers to an equal amount of energy intake and energy expenditure. It's easiest to think of it kind of like a scale, as you can see here. Energy intake, our diet, is on one side. Energy expenditure is on the other side. Energy expenditure includes three things. So we have our planned physical activity, when an individual might go to the gym. Non-planned physical activity, so this is just activities of daily living, walking around, going to and from, doing your daily task. And then there's a tiny bit of energy that's expended when we eat, called the thermal effect of food. So when our energy intake and energy expenditure are equal, we can maintain our weight pretty well, meaning that we're eating exactly what we're using. The problem comes is what happens when you change one aspect of the energy balance scale. Now, most researchers and individuals like to concentrate on that energy intake side. We know that when we eat more, if we don't change our physical activity, we tend to gain weight. And if we eat less and don't change our physical activity, we tend to lose weight. But the question is, what happens when you change energy expenditure without changing that energy intake side? Now, hopefully you can see that these components are very interactive, but the problem is they're also very difficult to measure, which makes doing this research very hard. There's a need for greater energy balance research. Most studies that look at the energy expenditure only side are not answering that question as the primary aim. It's a secondary analysis, which means it's not adequately powered for you to get meaningful results. Many times studies are not long enough, so you need a study that's at least 6 months, if not 9, 12, or 18 months long. And then you have to make sure you're using state-of-the-art techniques for measuring all components of energy balance, meaning we want to make sure we are getting accurate and valid assessments of both energy expenditure and energy intake, which can be quite difficult. Now, while there's not a lot of studies out there, I am going to be referring to two today, the Midwest exercise trials, or the MET studies. These studies are adequately powered studies to determine what happens when you increase energy expenditure without changing diet. The first study is the Midwest exercise trial, or MET-1. This was a randomized control trial in overweight and obese men and women who had been previously sedentary, meaning they had no current planned physical activity they were doing. They were put in an exercise program where they had to have exercise for 45 minutes a day, 5 days a week, for 16 months. Now, this exercise had to be supervised, so we had to ensure they were actually meeting their exercise and energy expenditure goals. So they would come into a laboratory gym, and they wore a heart rate monitor to make sure that their heart rate was in the correct zone and that they stayed in that area for at least 45 minutes getting in their exercise. They wore accelerometers to measure their physical activity outside of the exercise sessions. We told them not to change their diet at all, and diet was measured periodically throughout the study using a weigh and measure technique I'll talk about a little later. So what we saw was at the end of the 16 months, women maintained their weight overall. There were some that gained and some that lost, but overall they kind of maintained in a constant level. However, in men, almost all men lost weight, some of it clinically significant. So the question became, why was exercise affecting men but not women? Well, the problem is that everyone was prescribed 45 minutes of physical activity. We know that men typically have greater muscle mass, and that leads to higher amounts of a resting metabolic rate, which allows them to expend more energy during the day and when at exercise. So men were actually expending about 250 more calories than women. When you add this up on 5 sessions a week across 16 months, you can see where there might be some differences and why the men lost more weight than the women. This led to the formation of the MET2 study, or the Midwest Exercise Trial 2. This was, again, another randomized control trial in overweight and obese men and women who had been previously sedentary, except instead of prescribing exercise based on time, it was prescribed based on energy expenditure. So again, men and women had to have those supervised exercise sessions 5 days a week across 10 months, but they were randomized to either a control group, which didn't do any exercise, or they were randomized in the intervention to a 400 or 600 calorie per day energy expenditure during these exercise sessions. This means that everyone was working out for different amounts of time. If you had some women might have to work out for 75 minutes to meet their energy expenditure goals, while a male might be able to only do it for 25 minutes. Again, we verified that they were meeting these energy expenditure goals using indirect calorimetry. They wore accelerometers to monitor their outside physical activity, and they were told not to change their diet. Now, to make sure that we were getting accurate and valid assessments of their energy expenditure during exercise, we performed a test that we called the EEX test, in which individuals would come in once a month. They would walk on the treadmill, and we would perform indirect calorimetry. Indirect calorimetry means they wore a mask that measured their gas exchange and gives us a pretty good estimate of energy expenditure during that time. So we were able to validate the energy expenditure of their exercise, and this would give them a baseline recommendation, or their baseline minutes that they would be doing that month. So how many minutes they needed to go to burn their prescribed energy expenditure. And this was changed every month, or updated every month, as individuals lost or gained weight and changed their resting metabolic rate or became more fit. So what we found was that the control group in this, they maintained their weight, but both men and women in the 400 and 600 groups all lost weight using exercise alone. You can see in men that they did a bit better in the 600 than the 400 group, and women was about the same in both. And it's great that they lost weight, but what does that really mean in terms of health? Well, we like to look at weight loss in terms of clinical significance. So 5% weight loss is what we count as clinically significant. At 5% weight loss, you tend to see decreases in blood pressure, blood lipid levels, and blood glucose. In the 600 groups, most men and women all lost weight, and you can see that 68.4% and 55.6% of them lost clinically significant weight. So they hit at least that 5% goal, if not more. In the 400 groups for men and women, again, most individuals lost weight, with a few more gaining, but still, many lost that clinically significant amount, so 44.5 and 47.4 lost clinically significant amounts of weight. So this is great. What we learned was that by doing exercise alone, you can lose clinically significant amounts of weight, and you can have health benefits from it. What was interesting is that we also measured body composition. Now, just to give you an idea, that when you diet or lose weight by using a combination of diet and exercise, or diet alone, you tend to lose both lean muscle mass and body fat. The goal is typically to preserve as much lean muscle mass as possible, because lean muscle mass contributes to our resting metabolic rate, making it so we burn more energy throughout the day. And we also really want to lose the body fat only, because body fat's really what contributes to the health effects seen with obesity and those comorbidities related to obesity. What was interesting was by losing weight using exercise alone, the weight was all fat loss. Individuals actually gained a little bit of lean muscle mass, which really emphasizes that they were seeing greater health benefits using this technique. So we learned by exercise alone that you can lose clinically significant amounts of weight and fat, which both help contribute to a healthier lifestyle. But the problem comes, so what happens with diet? When you change that energy expenditure, do people naturally increase what they're eating to compensate? Or do they maybe start decreasing their energy intake because now they're living a bit healthier of a lifestyle and they feel like they should eat less? So we decided to look and see what happens to the diet side. Now, before I get into this, I kind of want to talk about the methodology. There is a big problem when measuring energy intake. Most individuals in research, myself included, like to use 3-day food records, 24-hour recalls, or other self-report measures. The problem is that self-report is not always accurate. Individuals tend to forget exactly what they had the day before, or they forget and leave out condiments or side items that you might not think of, or they can't remember the exact preparation techniques. Furthermore, it's really hard for people to estimate how much they ate and, be able to look and say, oh yeah, I had a cup of pasta or 3 ounces of meat. We just naturally don't pay attention to that. There's also a bit of self-report bias. So many individuals try to tell you what they think you want to hear compared to what they actually ate, because they want to please you as the researcher. It's gotten to the point where in 2013, 16 prominent individuals got together, led by Dale Scholler, and wrote a report that said, going forward, we should accept that self-report energy intake is fatally flawed, and we should stop publishing inaccurate and misleading energy intake data. This might seem harsh, but in reality it is true. When you are trying to measure energy balance, so you need to know exactly how much someone was eating compared to exactly how much energy was expended, you need these assessments to be as accurate and as reliable as possible. Thus, we set out to try to improve our energy intake assessments to make them more accurate and reliable and valid. So for the MET1 study, we used a weigh and measure technique. Individuals in the study would come in and they had to eat in our university cafeteria for the 2-week period of time. Now they could eat whatever they wanted, just kind of like the buffets here I've learned, where they would just go around and put all their food that they wanted on their plate. They would bring it over to a research table, and we had staff lined up who would take each individual item and weigh it before and after consuming to get an accurate amount of the grams consumed. The problem with this, as you can imagine, is it was very timely, and because of that, it cost a lot of money. And it just wasn't feasible to do for every research study. So the next thing we proposed was a digital photography assessment, and we did this in MET2. So again, this you can see is a graph of energy intake compared to doubly labeled water, and this is self-report versus accuracy, and you can see how inaccurate it is. So doubly labeled water is a biochemical assay that measures energy expenditure, energy intake, and we compared that to food records, so individual amounts of food, 3-day food records and what they report. And as you can see here, people were not very good at being accurate about what they were consuming. Most people either slightly overestimated, but the bigger problem is the majority of people underestimate. We also know that when you're working with overweight and obese individuals, they tend to underestimate their food or underestimate their food consumed even more. So again, we set out to do this digital photography technique. And so in the digital photography techniques, again, individuals had to eat in the university cafeteria. They could have whatever they wanted. And we had the nutrition information for all the food. So what we really had to determine was how much they ate. So the men and women would get their trays, and they would come over and they would just get photos taken before and after eating. Here's some examples of the setup. With these photos, we were able to set props on the side to determine how much food was being consumed, and all staff were trained to be reliable in this. To make sure we were doing this correctly, we did go back and assess, and we compared the energy consumed using our digital photography technique with the doubly labeled water, again, that biochemical assay that we consider to be the gold standard, and a 3-day food record, all consumed at the same time. You can see that the doubly labeled water and digital photography were within about 6.8% of each other, while the doubly labeled water and the 3-day food record were within 15.7% of each other. So we were able to greatly improve the accuracy of our energy intake technique using the digital photography plus recall. So now that you know a little bit about the methodology that goes behind that, I can kind of show you the results. So in that MET1 trial, that Midwest exercise trial, where individuals exercised for 45 minutes a day, 5 days a week, there were no changes in energy intake from baseline to 16 months in men or women. The same thing was seen in MET2 when they had the prescribed group. So in the control 400 and 600 groups, there were no changes in energy intake from baseline to 10 months in men or women. We also looked at the macronutrient content to see if they compensated at all, either eating more carbohydrates or more protein, more fat. And we did not see any clinically significant changes in men and women in any of the 3 groups. We also measured the diet quality, so we wanted to determine, do people eat a healthier diet when they're exercising, or maybe do they make poor diet choices, some more sugary foods because they feel that they can since they now have an exercise routine? We also didn't see any clinically significant differences or significant differences in diet quality from baseline to that 10 months. So the takeaway message of this is that the components of energy balance really are interactive. What we eat and what we expend both kind of play a role with each other and can contribute to our weight. Energy balance is very hard to measure, and that way, if you're ever doing energy balance, you need to make sure you're using methodology that is accurate and valid, because it's very important to make sure that you're getting reliable assessments of energy intake and energy expenditure. However, the biggest takeaway from this is exercise alone can produce weight loss, and it can be clinically significant, and it can also produce clinically significant fat loss while having minimal effect on the diet. The problem becomes, as you guys, maybe some of you heard, that some women, in order to get that 600 calories of energy expenditure a session, had to work out for 75 minutes or more, sometimes, or an hour, and most men were a little bit less. I know a lot of people like to think, I don't have time to work out for an hour. I have a busy life. I have kids. Well, it kind of leads back, and this is an old cartoon, but there is some truth behind it. What fits your busy schedule better, exercising 1 hour a day or being dead 24 hours a day? It's a little extreme, but I think it proves its point home that 1 hour a day of exercise really isn't that much when you look at how much it can improve your health and how much it can improve your weight. Thank you.